Perfect. Thanks so much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks to all of you for joining us today for this closing press conference of the third meeting of the Open-Ended Working Group for the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. My name is David Ainsworth. I'm the Information Officer at the Secretariat. I'll be moderating today's session. Just let you know that this press conference is also being streamed on the YouTube channel of the Convention on Biological Diversity. We'll begin today with brief remarks from Elizabeth Mrema, the Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity. These will be followed by comments from the co-chairs of the working group, Francis Ogwal and Basile van Havre. After this time, we will be joined by Deputy Executive Secretary David Cooper, at which time we'll open the floor for questions. Participating journalists who registered for the press conference can ask their questions in the chat here on the platform. I can remind you, please, to include your name and the name of your publication when you ask your questions so that we can direct them appropriately and understand. In the YouTube channel, we'll be monitoring that. If you do ask questions, you will have to identify yourself as a reporter in publication for those to be managed. So without further ado, let me begin the conference by inviting Elizabeth Mrema, the Executive Secretary, to speak. So if we could give the floor to Elizabeth. Please go right ahead.
Thank you very much, David, and all the journalists who are with us. At this meeting, delegates from around the world, both governments and stakeholders alike, worked to build a framework that will be widely accessible and easily understood at all levels of society to foster integrated and inclusive approaches to implementation. Participants envisage a framework that is truly global in nature and embraced by all segments of society. Their commitment brought us all one step closer to the beginning of the new era for the protection of nature. Delegates reviewed Draft 1 of the Global Biodiversity Framework and engaged in in-depth discussions to refine all goals, targets, and elements needed to make the framework both ambitious and transformative to ensure that the Draft 1 now reflects a full range and richness of their views. Delegates will continue their discussions during the resumed session in January next year in Geneva, Switzerland, where they hope to advance the framework in preparation for its adoption at the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties in Kunming, China next year. Parties to the convention also helped build momentum, political momentum for the 15th Conference of the Parties by convening a high-level biodiversity pre-COP event on 30th August in the margins of the meetings under the leadership of the government of the Republic of Colombia to promote the critical elements of the framework and ensure the level of ambition needed to safeguard and put biodiversity on a path to recovery by 2030. The pre-COP event, hosted by His Excellency President Ivan Duque Marquez of the government of Colombia, as a host of our third working group on the post-2020 framework, saw the participation of heads of state and government and included announcements and of commitments by governments that are members of the high-level ambition coalition and equally signatories of the Leaders' Pledge for Nature. So delighted that open-ended working group has been suspended until next year. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much, Executive Secretary. At this time, I'd like to invite the co-chairs of the process, Francis Ogwal and Basile van Havre, to provide some brief comments. Francis, let's begin with you.
Thank you very much. moderator, and good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are, colleagues out there. As pointed out by the Executive Secretary, we've had a very fruitful discussion, I would say, of the Post-2020 Draft 1. Due to the COVID pandemic, we could have had a physical meeting perhaps around this time. But because of the situation we are in now, we thought that to keep the momentum going and to get the views of parties, we needed to hold this meeting. It wasn't a negotiation per se, but it was just to enable us capture views from parties and stakeholders. So at the end of this meeting, we have got very useful input, very useful views from parties on draft 1 and stakeholders. I must say, not only parties, all stakeholders on draft 1. They've given us very useful ideas. They've shared their views honestly, and I think they've got to know what each other is thinking about the goals, the targets, the milestones, the entire structure of the framework. So it has been a very fruitful discussion, much as it has not been a negotiation point of view. So this, to us, gives us the opportunity now to begin setting ourselves ready for the resumed meeting, the physical one, which is planned for January 2022. And we hope that when parties and stakeholders reach at that time in that meeting, they will be able to pick up relatively faster, given the fact that they've heard from each other. They know what most of them are having views on a particular part of the framework itself, and that should therefore help us to move faster during that time. One thing we have to say is that there is hope now that we could have this framework actually concluded, because we only have about maybe 7 or so months to May, when the COP is expected to be held next year. So I would say we are beginning to turn the corner, and on a positive note, we see that there's still hard work to be undertaken, but there's hope we are going to make that progress and have the framework adopted. So that is what I can say of now.
Thank you very, very much, Francis. I'd like to invite Basile van Havre right now to make some additional comments from his point of view. Basile, you have the floor.
Thank you, David, and thank you, and good day to all of you. Adding to the comment from Elizabeth and Francis, I want to point to a few things. What I noted is strong participation throughout the meeting. Numbers were high, thousands of people, hundreds, and they remained strong through the whole 2 weeks, and remain strong from all regions. So one of the objectives was making sure that participants everywhere were able to feel comfortable and have confidence in the process we have. So I think that's one point that was important for us. In terms of actual content, very happy to see that what we put on the table in July, draft 1, generally speaking, was well received by participants. So obviously there is hundreds and hundreds of comments on details and various views. I was chatting with our support staff, and my direct support has 87 pages of notes that we're gonna have to put into a document. But it is an important step to get the structure online, on track, and get people that get to see from parties that they're happy and confident in their capacity to move forward. So lots of work in front of us. We're going to be developing a program of work to go to January to make sure that all the documents are falling in place at the right time, that we're convening some informal discussion where we see that there is points that could be advanced. But really, my personal sentiment is that we've made progress. We've set up well for the January discussion, and we have this very valuable asset of a good working relationship among the parties. So those are a few very, very rapid reflection. Perhaps one more is, I'm amazed at the flexibility of people. We entered into this online process And if you're following me on Twitter, you saw the photo of 2 years ago, day for day in Nairobi, and today where I'm sitting here at my desk. And we don't know. There is no recipe for this work. We're making it as we go, and people have been playing along. They've been flexible. They've been setting up all night to review documents, etc. So a big kudos and thank you for all the participants. Back to you, David.
Great. Thank you very, very much, Basile, for your comments and remarks. So we'll turn to a period, we'll open the floor to questions. So I'll remind those of you, oh, hold on a second, do I see Basile speaking? Okay, so I just remind the participants that please enter your questions in the chat box now. I noticed when Mr. Goswami Urmi had some sound questions. Please enter your questions in the chat box, and then I will direct them to the participants. If those of you who are indeed following on the YouTube stream, please identify yourself as a journalist, and then you can also enter your questions there in that area. So we are available. And also, just to let you know that the Deputy Executive Secretary, Mr. David Cooper, is also going to join us to take questions and provide comments as well. The floor is open. Let's see here. We might have some issues here. Hang on a sec. We're working for some of the questions here. Maybe what I'm going to do while we're waiting for some of those chats to come in, I'm going to direct actually perhaps to Basile and Francis. Could you maybe speak to a couple of areas where you felt that there was the most tremendous progress made in the areas? So Basile, Francis, can you talk to us about those areas where you feel we've advanced well?
It's hard. You're asking me what's my favorite child. I think we've seen progress on a number of targets. What I've seen is, in some cases, there is probably a higher level of convergence than others, and that is totally natural. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how we can answer the question asked about numerical targets and the numerical aspects, and definitely I can see some good debate going on, particularly on the notion of whether we should have a measurable aspect into goals versus not, and how that relates to the action targets. Perhaps Francis can add to that.
Yeah, I think that opening statement by Basile was a very good one. You're asking us to say something from, I will love this framework as is, in totality. So to pull even one against the other, it is so hard for us, so hard. We love this child in totality. Now, there, in addition to what Basile has said, where we saw that perhaps progress wasn't made much, and for which we didn't, I think, have time to discuss it much, was on the milestones. So there, we are yet to going to hear more what parties are thinking about milestones. Their views, it should be there, their views, otherwise that it should be integrated into the targets. But that was one area that we didn't discuss much during this meeting. But otherwise, progress was made in all the targets, all of them. At first, we were a little bit worried. Around Monday, we were thinking, oh God, we might have to think of extending this meeting. But we made progress in all of them. And the goals, likewise, just a few additional comments might come on goal A because of constraint here and there. We're not able to do it well enough. But overall, I think what we had set ourselves to do for this virtual meeting was actually achieved, which has turned out to be a very big progress for us as co-chairs and all stakeholders at the Secretariat and the team. We feel light enough, really, with this work, because had we not completed all these targets at this stage, we would have had a gap at this point in time. But we are close to even over 99% there in terms of what we wanted to do.
Excellent. Good. Thanks. We have a question from Patrick Greenfield of The Guardian. He would like to know what are the priority issues that are to be resolved in person in Geneva in January. So I think I'll turn that. We'll start maybe with the co-chairs, and then we can have the team at the Secretariat afterwards. Thanks.
Thank you, and good to hear from Patrick. Priority issue for face-to-face. I think there is three that come to mind. Definitively 30 by 30 and the question of protection and conservation of land and how numerical targets should be done around that. We saw some that there was a variety of perspective on that. Digital sequence information remain an important subject, and that's gonna needs to be discussed. Resource mobilization and how the various pieces of that puzzle work with each other. The goal D, target 18 and 19. So definitively we're gonna need to have that. And then finally, I would say a big discussion is this a framework for government and for Ministry of the Environment, or is it a framework for all society? There is definitively a range of views on that, and we're going to have to find a ways to get through that.
Okay, thank you very, very much, Basile. Francis?
Yes. To add on to what Basile has just said, I think the other thing I wanted to say before I point out what could be perhaps the most important is that first we didn't negotiate at this meeting. So it was just getting views and capturing them. So we didn't negotiate on any. But of course, as we are capturing the views, then you could try to gauge what could be the areas. In addition to what Basile has said, issues on capacity building, capacity development, technology transfer, access and benefit sharing, in addition to the DSI that Basile is raising, because there are a number of inputs now or views that actually ABS and DSI should more or less go hand in hand, and those are the areas that you see people are going to spend a lot of time on. But the other thing that also came up was the issue of the ambition of the framework. Some people are saying you're not ambitious, and then others are saying again here you are too ambitious. So you see two worlds on the same thing. You'll find in some targets we are talking of all species, all ecosystem, all this, all pollution from all sources. Then people again saying you are too ambitious. At the other side, they're saying the framework is not ambitious. So what's going to be the divide there for us to come out with a framework that surely the stakeholders are going to see as ambitious enough and not less ambitious? In fact, it shouldn't be less ambitious than the strategic plan for biodiversity that just ended. So some of those, in addition to what Basile has said, is the area that you think parties are still going to have to spend a little bit of their energy on to see where is going to be the balance of this term ambition of the framework. And the resources, as Basile said, if the ambition is to be as good as parties expect, then the resources should be equally there to match it. There is no way you're going to do one and leave the other. Otherwise, then they don't balance and nothing happens. So some of those could be areas that parties will talk about, but still in general, as I said, we didn't negotiate. So we still expect them to talk even then on all the targets still when they're there, yeah.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very, very much, Francis. I'd like to turn to the Executive Secretary to comment and then have the Deputy provide a few remarks after that. Thank you.
Thank you. A lot has already been said, but to me, to really prioritize at this point what will be important and the other will be difficult. But what I can say, what will be important, whatever state the framework will be adopted. Of course, the world is expecting an ambitious and transformative. What that exactly means is yet to be seen. But it will only be a transformative framework if it will be implemented. So I hope as the negotiations ensue and continue, that aspect will not be forgotten. Otherwise, we'll have a very nice document to decorate our shelves and not implement it. And if we talk of implementation, then the issue of means of implementation then comes to play. Whether all countries will be able to implement. And when it comes to implementation, as it is expected that the framework will be universally applicable, I hope at the end of the day, all stakeholders will be able to see themselves in the framework and be able then to contribute to its implementation. So I will be more forward-looking in terms of whatever is agreed now. Will it be implemented and how?
Excellent. Thank you, Elizabeth.
If I could add something there, David.
Sure, please go right ahead.
Actually, for me, building on from what we see happened with the strategic plan, which just ended last year, and the executive secretary has touched on that. We've touched on it. I just want to maybe get back to it again. You see, resources for implementation of this framework. How early is it going to be provided? You adopt a framework in May 2022, and you want to, people should start implementation immediately. Now, these processes of funds being provided, even if the funds are there, how easy is it going to be for parties or the LDCs, seeds and others to access these funds? If it will take 4 years, if it will take 3 years, if it will take, I don't know, 5 years, you can just imagine what is going to happen in between there. So funds could be there, and we need them to be in amount that is commensurate with the ambition that will come up with the framework, but also accessibility. How fast will parties be able to access it? That will be another important matter altogether. If the process will remain lengthy, then the problem we want to address in 2022 or 2023, by the time you get the money or the funds in 2025, 26, it has more and become worse or whatever. So you will be needing more money. So that is the thing I wanted to emphasize about resources, accessibility and how fast it can be made available. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Francis. I'm going to actually maybe just move, instead of getting the deputy on board right now, I want to address some of the questions we've got in the YouTube channel and here as well. So maybe one of the first ones is Klaus Reed has asked a number of questions about precisions, milestones, action targets, precisions. Could maybe we have the co-chairs talk about what's the next stage? When are we going to see something next coming out of the process that people will look at and what the delegates will be looking at?
Maybe I can start. So basically, I think there is keep in mind we're suspending this meeting. We're going to be resuming. We've issued a draft 0 in July. There is a certain level of ownership into that structures, as I mentioned, and for us, it's our recommendation is that this draft remain the key basis for discussion. Now, around this, there is a number of pieces that we will be, that's draft 1, of course. Around this, there is a number of other pieces that will be helpful to delegates when they come together. And some were approved today. The one document will be the collection of the views of everybody, and that's going to be a good reference document. We will have a number of pieces that Francis and I will suggest and recommend to the Bureau that we develop. Those are not, there is no final decision yet, but that's a bit of where we will be advising the group to be going. One is we want to sit down and reflect, Francis and I, together with the Secretariat team, and create a document that would be our reflection on that. And that would be kind of a collection of questions in place where we see delegates or group of delegates pushing in a certain direction. And so question on how that relate to the rest. If we can see a place where we can craft some language that could be helpful, we'll put that in there as well. And all those documents will be available 6 weeks in advance of the January meeting. So sometime we don't have a date yet, but expect something in the end of November or beginning of December. and that's going to be important. In parallel to that formal work, there is also the informal track of work. We've heard several questions from delegates. They wanted to get into more discussion about certain aspects around resource mobilization or numerical aspect of the target. So we're going to need to think about how we strategically use the time we have to gather some informal discussion and perhaps invite some experts to help us shed some light. And then the idea being that we want to be ready to enter into good discussion and not be bogged down when we get together in Geneva with facts question. So it should be all about policies and negotiation. Thank you.
Excellent. Good. Thanks very much. I'm going to move on to some questions because, believe it or not, we're going to run out of time here. I want to prioritize a question we got from Louise Guillot from Politico Europe. First of all, and I'm going to put this actually to the executive secretary and then to the co-chairs. And her question talks about this meeting and the broader process. She says, what are some of the challenges that you're going to be facing of doing the UN Biodiversity Conference, COP15, in two parts? In her mind, is this a concern for the co-chairs, or how does that affect the process? So maybe Elizabeth, I'll have you take that first, and then I'll have the co-chairs then react to that. And then I've got another question from a different journalist after that.
I think the question can be looked at two ways. One, yes, challenge, but also an opportunity. And I'll begin with an opportunity. Opportunity in the sense that the two parts gives us and gives the negotiators, the parties and others more time to prepare and effectively negotiate, hence the meeting in January. The challenge could be, which one could look at, probably more delayed will also delay taking action. But we believe that action, particularly at national level, continues to be guided by the existing national policies, particularly the national biodiversity strategies and action plan, and therefore implementation of the Aichi targets, implementation of the strategic plan, although it ended 2020, but implementation continues, especially considering that the framework is building upon that those targets and plans. So I hope we are not looking at challenge in terms of delaying implementation and therefore further exacerbating biodiversity loss, but that it gives that opportunity to better prepare for the negotiations. And of course, in between, we have seen the momentum continue to be gained. During these 2 weeks, last week, we had a pre-COP, again, to promote an ambitious framework. During the first part of the COP15, we'll have a high-level also political segment, again, helping us to maintain that momentum. So I think let us be positive to look at the two parts as opposed to looking at more challenges. And now there is experience that our COP is not the first one to do into two parts. We had the UN Environment Assembly also being held in two parts. They did one earlier this year, the next part next year. So we are learning also as the situation permits us to proceed. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'll turn to the co-chairs now to address this question of the challenges.
Hello, Louise. I think I won't repeat what Elisabeth has said, and I'm clearly on the side of seeing the advantage. Let's hope we're going to have a very strong political signal for ambition in Kunming in October, and that will serve as a jumping start for the negotiation that take place in January. The other point I would make is that this is not a repeat of the same subject in the two meetings. There is a very clear logic in things that needs to be done in October on the administrative side, and we're quite and then the bulk of the negotiation will take place in the spring. So we need the time. We would not be ready in October to enter into a negotiation, so it could not happen in October. And we're confident that we have a good setup to deliver on a strong framework. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Francis?
Yes, I think in addition to what Elizabeth and Basile have said, not to repeat much of it, of course, when we come to the October meeting, I see that the way it is going to be structured, it will be such, as Basile and Elizabeth have pointed out, to give us opportunity actually to help parties better prepare for the upcoming meeting. So we see that as an opportunity for the framework itself, much as there might not be a lot of progress made there. But having said that, I think when we get into the meeting proper of the COP itself, therein then lies opportunity for us to actually make sure that all these aspects we are talking of, whether it is on Nagoya, whether it is on Nagoya Protocol on access and benefit sharing, whether it is on biosafety or the CBD itself, these meetings take place concurrently. So that again gives us opportunity, if I may use the word, to really make sure that the process are informing each other well enough. So we don't see like October is going to be a disadvantage to the framework itself, because the framework is also going to benefit from the other meetings that are planned to happen either in January or in May next year. That's what I can say.
Excellent. Thank you, Francis. Actually, I'm going to give an opportunity for David Cooper to step in before I ask the question from Mike Shanahan, Deputy Executive Secretary. Any comments you want to make about these challenges or opportunities that we have?
So I think I would really just echo what others have said about the opportunity of providing political momentum. We heard from delegates in the meeting over the last 2 weeks that they want a framework that's ambitious, one that's coherent, that targets, the actions and the targets add up to the goals, one that's balanced across the three objectives of the convention, and one that involves all actors, and a lot of emphasis on Indigenous peoples and local communities. And so what's going to be key to success is the delegates, when they resume in January, deliver on all of these aspects. And as many have said, you need the means of implementation to support the ambition. So high ambition is not high ambition unless it's high ambition across the board in terms of both what we're trying to achieve and in terms of the means to achieve it. Similarly, we know from the analysis that we've seen over the past few years, particularly the IPBES global assessment, the global biodiversity outlook, that to bend the curve of biodiversity loss, to achieve those objectives people want to see, we have to have action across all the sectors. We have to address the direct and indirect drivers. So what can happen, I think, in October, in this first part of COP, is strong messages from governments at the political level that this is what they want to see delivered in January and then in Kunming in May next year.
Excellent. Thank you very much, David. So Mike Shanahan's been very patient. His question's been sitting out there for a while. So his question is almost a little bit like a crystal ball question. He says, what changes are we likely to see on the so-called 30 by 30 target, the protected areas aspect between draft 1 and draft 2? So I know that's a crystal ball question, so maybe it's an opportunity for us to talk a little bit about the dimensions of that discussion. I think I'll start with the co-chairs on that one, and then we'll bring in the executive secretary and deputy.
It's interesting to look at the discussion and how the debate evolve on this target. We know that there is a significant constituency and a lot of organization behind the 30 by 30. We also heard very clearly today, over the last 2 weeks, some of the question that has been raised by several parties about how that practically could implement. And I think those are very valid questions about what does that mean? Is it a global target? Is it a national target? Is it the targets that apply equally about land and sea area? It extends into capacity building and resource mobilization. What does that mean? So it's going to be very interesting to see how this debate is evolving over the next few months. Clearly, we heard some interesting question about the scientific rationale. Yet we've been talking about that for quite a while. So this is one of those where I think what we've seen over the last 2 weeks is that listening. Everybody was listening to, and talking is easy. We all know that. I can talk a lot, but listening is the hard part, and integrating those various perspectives is going to be challenging. It's going to be challenging for Francis and I and the Secretariat. It's going to be challenging for every party. So lots of very good leads and direction in that. Francis, do you want to add to that?
Just briefly, of course, the 30 by 30, if you look at it historically, is that it has come from the previous Aichi target that was mainly talking of 17% terrestrial and 10% marine. So the issue now here is people are saying other than divide it like that, have one. And that is why we're talking of 30 by 30, other than the previous one, which divided those two into those percentage I've talked about. But as pointed out by Basile, I think we will need to see what eventually the parties, you call it, agree to, because even at this point, when we're in this meeting, different views were still on this same subject. So let's see how they will, try to resolve the issue of 30 by 30 when we have the physical meeting. I think that will give them opportunity really to move forward. But they have come up with different views so far at this point. Although there is also general support, but there are also other views expressed on the same.
Thank you very much. Executive Secretary, please.
Thank you, David. That's a good question. As had been indicated by the co-chairs, much as there seem to be this momentum being gained of 30 by 30, but we also know that there are some quarters which are not in favor for obvious reasons. And then we also have the other quarter, and I hope finally what will finally be agreed and negotiated in whatever percentage, that safeguards also will be put in place, which is the factor which worries also some sectors, especially those who are fairly not sure whether 30 by 30 will be able to protect all stakeholders equitably. So probably some safeguards might be needed for reassurance if at all it will go through. And more so also important is what had been achieved by 10 and 20, so that then we can also be more ambitious and further upscale that distance. And what will be key later is, of course, 30 by 30 is just the quantity, but what will be the qualitative implementation, particularly to ensure that sustainable protection and management of those areas. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I think we'll turn now to the Deputy Executive Secretary. Could we just get another minute from you before we turn to our next question?
I think some of the really important views that we heard during the working group, one was about the effectiveness, not just the area of these protected areas. So it's not only about expansion, and that needs to happen, but we certainly need to improve the effectiveness, both in terms of the management of existing protected areas, but also in terms of where those areas are located in delivering benefits, biodiversity benefits, ecosystem service benefits. And then, as Elizabeth was saying, ensuring not only safeguards for Indigenous peoples and local communities, but that we really, that Indigenous peoples and local communities are very much in the driving seat in terms of designating and managing protected areas. And we know from the science that existing areas managed by Indigenous peoples and local communities tend to be in a much better shape from a conservation, from a biodiversity point of view than others. So this is an opportunity rather than a constraint as I see it. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. So the next question we have comes from Urmi Goswami of the Economic Times of India. And this situates the work within the convention in the broader issue including of climate change. And so Goswami writes, he says, in the original schedule, the UN Biodiversity Conference, or COP15, would have been wrapped up before UNFCCC COP26. So we have a changed context now. What sort of input on the issue of nature and climate action could we expect at Glasgow? So I think for this one, I'm going to turn first to the Executive Secretary and then the Deputy, and then maybe then get the co-chairs after that.
I hope I have an answer, but my sense is we know very well, looking at the COP26 agenda of the climate change, a lot or quite, there will be quite substantive discussions on the nature solutions for climate change. So that again, we hope and expect that even although the COP will be on climate change, but they're already looking at nature providing solutions to both climate mitigation and adaptation. And we know that 30% of greenhouse gas emissions actually will be a contribution from the biodiversity nature. So, and this is why also you have, the scientists have been reminding us that climate change and biodiversity loss are two emergence crises, well connected, and solutions should be looked at together and not in isolation.
Thank you. Deputy?
Yeah, clearly we can only achieve the biodiversity objectives if the climate objectives are also achieved. Already we have, we're seeing loss of biodiversity because of climate change at around 1 degree of warming. If climate change is in excess of 1.5 degrees, it's going to be very difficult to bend the curve on biodiversity loss. So the first thing is we need a very successful COP26 to deliver on the what was agreed in Paris. And then in addition, of course, biodiversity can contribute to that effort, as Elizabeth was saying, in terms of both mitigation through ecosystem-based approaches, through management of land, and adaptation in reducing the impacts of climate change on people and on nature itself.
Excellent, thank you. We're going to turn to the co-chairs. You've got another couple of minutes to make remarks before I bring this to a close.
So on this very last issue, adding to what Elizabeth and David has said, we have some very concrete proposal in draft 1 on climate change. I know, and then what is going to be interesting is, will the outcome of COP26, will they have the same level of concrete outcome on nature? I have not seen that at this point in time. I think we need to work together. We need to go beyond the level of the rhetoric of saying nice things, but it is about moving to that next step of having concrete elements in both frameworks. Thank you.
Thank you. Francis, to you.
Yes, thank you. I think I'll build on what Basile has said. For me, just like Basile is saying, and the executive has also said something close to that, you know, whenever climate change is happening, we should at this point be seeing that actually climate change addresses the issue of biodiversity just as we address always issues of climate change. Now, if we expect all the time first to hold ours and then take to climate change, when a situation like this comes, then it becomes a challenge to us. So time has come when issues of biodiversity, whenever there's climate change discussion happening, it should not be that ours has not yet happened or should happen before. This matter should be really looked at as one that needs to be implemented together. As already has been pointed out, look at Target 8, where we are saying that biodiversity can contribute at least 10 gigatons of carbon dioxide, per year. What is that? Really, in essence of climate change mitigation and adaptation, why couldn't that be seen and appreciated on when matters of climate change are being discussed? So going forward, these two conventions need to complement each other, irrespective of the time when they take place. If we begin thinking CBD must always happen before climate change, and then we take CBD there, we are disadvantaging ourselves. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much, Francis. Well, thank to all of the panelists for joining us today. We're actually at the end of the time, and some of our panelists have got to make some curfews and head out. So thanks all of you for joining us. Thank you for panelists for taking the time. I always love hearing these conversations between the four of you. It's always a fun narrative that we develop. So everyone, have a good Friday evening. Have a good weekend, and be safe. And thank you from all of us here at the Secretariat. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay.
Out. So thanks all of you for joining us. Thank you for panelists for taking the time. I always love hearing these conversations between the four of you. It's always a fun narrative that we develop. So everyone, have a good Friday evening. Have a good weekend, and be safe. And thank you from all of us here at the Secretariat. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.